Well, KZN Premier can help you with water. He knows a good supplier. Madam Speaker, Mr. President, honourable members, the devastating flood in KwaZulu-Natal has brought immense misery to a part of the country that was already reeling and battling to recover from the violent riots of last year and the looting. We hold those affected communities in our hearts and in our prayers, and we extend our deepest condolences to all of those who lost loved ones, family, friends, and colleagues. We can rebuild homes and streets and bridges, but we cannot bring back the 435 South Africans who've perished in this disaster. Our priority now must lie in bringing humanitarian relief to stricken communities and to reconnect them as quickly as possible to water, electricity, and sanitation infrastructure. It's been over 2 weeks now, and there are still far too many communities that still are living without water and without electricity. In many areas, there are still no signs of the promised water tankers, which very easily could have been brought in from other provinces to assist. Mr. President, if widespread access to clean water is not restored quickly, we are going to see the outbreak of a second disaster in the form of deadly disease. The urgency of restoring these services, and particularly clean drinking, cooking, and cleaning water, cannot be overstated. But somebody needs to drive this, and therein lies the problem. Mr. President, you clearly knew that your provincial government in KwaZulu-Natal nor your local government in eThekwini was set up with the task of dealing with this disaster, which is why you declared a national state of disaster. Indeed, the eThekwini Executive Committee has only met twice, and the full council inexplicably is yet to meet. The mayor of eThekwini has been entirely absent during this past 2 weeks, and the Premier's contribution was to hijack a water tanker for his personal use. Mr. President, you were right not to trust them. In your televised address, straight after the flood, you said that the primary responsibility was to coordinate and manage the disaster had been assigned to a national government. Pedestrian is your response to disasters. In theory, this would lift the responsibility away from local government and provincial government and allow your government to manage the rescue efforts and recovery efforts centrally. But I say in theory, because in the real world, this is not what's happening on the ground at all. In the real world, no one is actually managing this process. Everyone has simply run away from the problem, and desperate residents have been left once again to fend for themselves.
Order, man, order.
City officials have switched off their phones. The mayor's gone AWOL. Your councillors are telling panicked residents to F off on WhatsApp. The Premier grabs a water tanker for himself. Council staff are stealing the care packages meant for the rescuers. And when the ministers finally arrive, they commandeer helicopters and choppers for vanity flybys that should have been used to rescue individuals. And amid all this, our councillors are trying their best to assist frustrated communities, and they're having to bear the brunt of these frustrations because they're simply the only people that are there. So despite your best assurances on television and in this House, there is no coordinated national response at all. Your government, I'm afraid, Mr. President, is absent. By declaring a state of national disaster, and they're not stepping in with a nationally coordinated response, has created now a dangerous leadership vacuum in a time of great crisis. And as we saw in the riots last year, when leadership is absent, lawlessness and chaos start to reign. And already one city official has been killed at a water tanker filling depot. We dare not let this become a deadly repeat of the July riots last year. Mr. President, you said in your address, and I quote, that this situation called for a massive and urgent relief effort. But 2 weeks later, there's no sign of this effort. If a disaster management plan exists, no one has seen it. If there's a disaster management center, and it's better than your 30% that you got, if there's a disaster management center as mandated by the Disaster Management Act, where all the various response services are brought together into one location, no one has seen it. If leaders from national government have been assigned there to deal with the crisis, they must be operating by stealth because no one has seen or heard them. And we've seen so many times the promises on corruption that you make in speeches bear little reality with what happens on the ground, which is why that the motion passed by this House this morning to establish an ad hoc committee is important. Oversight must be exercised because we've seen what happens to your government when there's no exercise of authority from this House. We may offer you some advice, and you've asked everybody to pitch in, taken from our own experience of managing the drought disaster in the Western Cape. It's simply this: be present, be clear, and be honest. Let the people know there that you're in charge. Let them know exactly what the plan is and update them about this plan regularly. Don't promise 10,000 soldiers if you're only going to send 500. Don't guarantee that relief aid won't be stolen when you know that your party has a looting problem. Don't describe your relief effort as massive and urgent if it's anything but. We need to have a live dashboard to share real-time information on dam levels and water usage. And you need to be able to communicate the repair of infrastructure to people. People need to know who is in charge of coordinating government's disaster response. So tell them. Tell them the details of the plan. Who is in charge of humanitarian relief? Who's in charge of the next phase? The stabilization and recovery. This needs to be a clear and published and publicly available plan. Tell them where they can report their issues. Give them the assurance that these will be acted upon. You're dealing with people, Mr. President, who have been through a terrible ordeal. They're extremely vulnerable. They need reassurance, and they need to know that they can trust you. Be present, be clear, and be honest. You cannot disappear in a crisis. Thank you.